right, let's go. Good morning, everybody. So, we are here and we are live. What's that, Pums?
Vibrato and all.
Oh, you like the vibrato? Okay. Well, I tell you what Pumi's been doing. She's been going around telling everybody she's very proud of her little bits of grey in her hair that are all natural. She's got little bits of grey in there. You can't really see them. Let me see if I zoom in here properly. Let's show people. Yeah, you can see a little bit of grey there. This is a sign of great wisdom and life experience. She is now to be taken extremely seriously. She is now a village elder.
Damn it.
Yeah. Just when you thought we were going to laugh and talk nonsense and have fun, now you understand people are taking you terrifically seriously from here on. When you have grey hair, the fun is over.
That is when the fun begins, yo. That is when the fun begins. I don't understand this obsession that people have with like youth and all of that stuff.
But
other than the fact that you maybe have a little bit more energy and your knees like
well,
but you can get knee replacements.
You can get knee replacements.
You can get hip replacements.
But Bill Maher often says, and he's one of the people who I love, despite numerous disagreements of all kinds over the years with him, I've always thought this is a guy who I would get along with. He's the kind of friend you could disagree with sort of person. I have a lot of friends like that in real life, but Bill Maher's the only one who's a public figure who I go, sometimes he says stuff that I completely vehemently disagree with. But
still a nice
if I was
guy.
sitting with Bill Maher, I would get along with him like a house on fire. We don't have a lot in common. He smokes weed, for example.
Really?
Yeah, plenty. Oh, are you kidding? It's like basically him, Woody Harrelson, Snoop Dogg, and Willie Nelson. Those are like the big.
But Willie Nelson, Bill Maher, and it's the age.
But those are the guys. They actually get together. They do a thing in Hawaii
together.
Yeah, all of them. Can you imagine? Yeah. So he says, the reason I brought him up, he talks about how the only acceptable discrimination in the world today is against age. It's ageism, right? And I don't necessarily even agree with that. But he says, in most cultures in the world, older people are revered. They are treated with respect, and they're considered to be fonts of wisdom and all this kind of thing. And he said, in America, they treat their old people like they're over and done with, has-beens, put them in a home, don't respect them. He said that's a very American thing. Now, again, I don't agree, because there are lots of people in America who look after their old people. The old people stay in the house with the rest of the family. And in South Africa, obviously, we have a very different culture, because by and large, I think the previous generation they form part of the extended family. I saw you posted the most beautiful thing this week about like your grandparents.
I was feeling a little... I just, over the weekend, I really have been, and last week, Tuesday would have been my grandfather's birthday. And so I was just missing my grandparents.
Yeah.
And they're the kind of people that I would just get in my car and drive, because my one grandmother lived in Meadowlands and my other grandmother lived out in Midvaal. So I'd drive to my grandmother in Meadowlands and spend some time with her. And then I'd get in my car and take the almost 1 hour drive to Midvaal and just hang out with my grandmother.
Fill up that tank with
love. You could afford to fill
No, I'm not talking about the fuel. I'm talking about your tank.
Oh my God.
Because old people,
also like old
your people, but your people. Like these are the
just...
people who informed the way you grew up, the way your parents grew up. Like, it's very special to have those people in your life. I didn't really, because my grandparents were all. I often joke that they did me the favor of dying before they became a problem. But they all, with the exception of my dad's father, all died when I was still in the single digits.
Really?
Maybe 11.
But you would have recognized it. I think the thing, and this is the thing I missed this weekend. Grandparents look at you like you're magic.
Yeah.
Like they can't imagine that you are a real thing. Like grandparents, because I can get that, right? I can get that. Now that I have a child, I can get it. Every time he grows older, every time, it's all just like, this is crazy. This is how people are formed. It's like weird. But grandparents also have that they can't, every time they see you, it's like you're magic to them. It's like they can't imagine that this person exists in the same realm. That's what I missed.
Or they maybe they can't believe that their kid produced that.
Possible.
Maybe that's where it comes from.
I have a picture in my house, and I think I have it on my Facebook, of my grandparents when I took Kaneho with on one of these kinds of journeys, and I took Kaneho with, and he had just learned how to walk. And so he was like this tiny little thing with the mohawk, and he was just running, because my grandparents lived on a farm, just running everywhere. And I have a picture of my grandmother holding this child, like, what? Like, what is this?
I mean, what I loved about your post is also there's, and you're very good at this. A lot of people are not. It's like there's a deep sort of gratitude and an understanding of context that comes with that, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And that's why I remembered it, because, I see you scroll through shit. You know how it goes on social media.
Yeah.
And it's not just because you're sitting here, but it made an impression on me. And like I stopped and I looked at the pictures of these faces, and it for some reason made me think, wow, here's a person who actually appreciates where she comes from, what context she was born into, the kinds of people who've made the decisions that made it possible for her to become the person that she was. And I wonder how many of us do that regularly, because it can help you. Like if you're going through a hard time or you're going through a good time, that gratitude for where you are, it's so goddamn important, and we all forget it because we're like worrying about tomorrow, we're worrying about the bank account, we're worrying about our health, aches and pains.
We're worrying about eggs, we're worrying
school.
About everything is a worry. Everything
all this
is
stuff.
a worry, and everything is fast.
And so you're just like caught up in the survival mode stuff. And you forget that if you zoom out far enough and you think forget 10 years, who knows if we're going to be here in 10 years, in a year, you look, and will I remember those things that I'm so worried about today in a year's time?
Probably not.
Almost certainly not. Almost certainly. If I ask you what you were worried about today, a year ago, I mean, they're general categories, but you're not going to be able to pinpoint anything.
No.
Not a chance, right? So, like, how stupid are we to not?
Short.
And how stupid are we to not like grab hold of the stuff that we will want to remember, like the grandparents and that stuff.
And that's why we've got to be grateful that we have like these amazing cameras in the palm of our hand all the time. Like the fact that your phone has this amazing, most powerful, take the pictures. Even though some of those pictures really only live in your mind, there are those moments, you know what I'm talking about, right? Where you wish you had the camera.
Yeah.
But the camera wasn't there. But you still have those images in your mind.
I don't know.
You don't have images like that in your mind?
A friend of mine sent this little, I think Facebook or Instagram or even your phone just puts these things together. Like he sent me 15 years of us being friends.
Oh my God.
In a video. And there were so many cool pictures there, and his wife's in them, and friends of ours who've moved overseas are in them. And like a picture of Fresh came up in there because we used to DJ together at things that he'd organized. It was all very cool. And, it's amazing what this stuff can do when it's additive and it's like a contributing thing to what makes your life valuable. But I don't miss like the pre-phone era. I've got far less evidence of all the like great times I had. No, all the great times. And I wish I had more pictures. But I don't really think it would have been the same. Like part of it is also that it becomes almost like a mysterious kind of mythological. It's like
then sometimes your brain warps memories.
It does.
Sometimes your brain warps
but there's like
memories.
A mythological element to it of, wow, we had so much fun. We did this, we did that. Some of it, I don't need the documentary evidence to prove that I was there. And frankly, it would almost make it just too ordinary if I did.
So pre the Instagram.
Yeah.
Like our phones all of us having phones with amazing cameras.
Yebo.
Do you remember thunder.com?
No, that was before my time. Eh?
What? That couldn't have been before your time.
No,
you
hang
were
on.
DJing.
Then it was probably something I didn't.
Thunder.com.
Was it an app?
It was no. It was here in Joburg. They used to have like these young,
So
cool, vibey people. What's wrong with your eye? Don't like rub it out.
No.
It was
Old age. Talking about going grey.
And they would
losing my vision.
be at all these parties. There'd be all these young, cool people at all these parties with cameras and would take pictures. And there was a website.
I know what you're talking about.
And there was a website.
Yes, man. You'd have to go.
Monday, you'd go to the website and you go
find
look for yourself
find your
and you're crazy.
Yes. Okay, now I know what you're talking about.
I love that.
So listen.
Hot chicks, someone saying hot chicks running around taking photos at the
door.
Yeah,
I remember that. Okay, I didn't know what you were talking about for a minute there.
That's what it was called, thunder.com.
Like Abantu says, grey equals wisdom. This is Phumi the Grey. Like Gandalf the Grey. Peter says, I don't have grey hair. I've only got a few chrome strips. And Congo Chris says, about 40% of my hair is grey. Does this mean I'm incredibly wise too? Well,
take it, Chris.
I'm not going to judge you on every single morning's comments, but, who knows? I got to say, I've got a friend he's younger than me by like 5 or 6 years. Grey, but silver.
Wow.
And he's been like that for maybe the last 7 or 8 years.
I've had grey hair since my 20s.
It looks,
but it's not, and it hasn't
good on some
all
people.
Gone grey.
No, sure.
But it's just, some people have ufuzo. Some people have ufuzo. I don't know what that is.
What is ufuzo?
I don't know. I'm trying to know what
that is.
It's like it's hereditary. Some hereditary. Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Some people have it because it's a trait they have in their family that they have. And then you could be like 15 years old with like a grey patch.
Very good. Pablo says this is just a basic Phumi appreciation post. Very good.
Love you, Pablo.
Nothing wrong with that. And Snipes is in it, hey? You just got to keep fighting for 5 coins because less or more means higher captured. I don't know what
does that
Snipes
mean,
says. SA has run out of money according to Godogwana. God, he says Godogwana. I like that. That's very clever. That's very smart. Is it true or just a government tactic to steal more money? Hey, listen. I have to catch up with a lot of the local news because I saw yesterday, this is quite a big story.
Local story.
Yeah, local story. Yeah. Floyd Shivambu posts, today we officially received the EFF podcast studios and recorded the first podcast with President Julius S. Malema. The first episode of the EFF podcast will premiere on EFF YouTube channel on Friday, 13 October 2023. We'll thereafter record and broadcast progressive content every week. We are telling our own stories.
Friday the 13th.
Good.
Do they really want to do that?
I would just like to, it's appropriate in some ways. I would like to welcome the EFF to podcasting and to YouTube, in a big way. I hope this works out for them. I hope that this becomes a channel through which they can explain some of their ideas, actually interrogate some of their ideas, and present them to the public.
They always have those press conferences that I wonder why
anybody
still goes to those press conferences. That start out as like a Julius Malema gossip session.
It's a podcast.
Where he's like going on about all sorts of people and who said this and who done that. I'm like, why are the journalists here? This kind of really? And so I think they're going to have a really successful YouTube channel and podcast because everybody wants to hear the gossip.
I think it's a very good idea. So good for them. All right. Phumelele.
Which was one of the things, remember, one of the things that when Dory asked me what did I want to talk about this morning, I said, I sent her a thing and I'm having one of those Zulu days today where I don't have the English words, but I sent her a thing saying,
listen, I grew up speaking English and I sometimes don't have English days. I felt like that on Monday.
And I kept trying to think, how am I going to describe? So for the listeners who do understand Nguni, Indaba Zabantu is like, Indaba is news.
News.
Zabantu of the people.
Of the people, right.
But it's more like gossip, right?
Mm.
And because I watched you and Jane talking about Dr. Lani.
Oh boy.
Right.
And by the way, that is blowing up on TikTok. Jane is she is the influencer to end all influencers. We've been sitting on her like she's a gold mine. She is blowing up on TikTok like you cannot believe at the moment. Like Jane is suddenly eclipsing everybody else. Some of us here have been, Simpiwe's on there, and Homolemo's on there, and Ryan's on there, and Lebang's on there, and everybody's like on there the whole time. I don't know a damn thing about it because I don't go on TikTok, but they're all really like killing it. And then Jane comes along with her Dr. Matthew summary, and she just wipes the floor with all of us.
I think it's a combination of factors. It's that Indabazabatu kind of thing. The thing with Dr. Matthews, it really brought home to me how social media has turned us all into like serious gossips. Gossips. Because
it's the same as the Dr. Nandi thing. And we just love a story we can get our teeth
Will
into.
and Jada.
Yeah, all of it.
Although I think we're done with Will and Jada.
No, we're not.
Oh no,
I saw a headline yesterday that apparently Chris Rock, I think he's just looking for shit here, but he apparently asked Jada out on a date.
That was a while ago.
But that was after the.
No, it was before the slap.
Oh, so that could have contributed to the slap.
This is listen. Will and Jada, we know just Indabazaga will know Jada. We all know way too much. And I think for most of us, it's completely involuntary. Because
no, well, they tell us everything without us having to ask.
I don't know.
They're those people who pitch up a party and start telling you about their sex lives when no one's actually asked them.
She did an interview yesterday or the day before. And again, I was just like, yeah, but now we are so deep. There's one of those like drawing kind of memes that have made that have blown up all over Twitter, where there's like weird line drawings of a person like standing like this or standing with the CV. But there's one with two people hugging, and the one says me on the head, and the other one says Indabazabantu hugging. Like I'm in love. This is how I feel about social media this week.
Izindabazabantu.
This
is what we do.
We're so deep in it. We're neck deep in all of these other people's
I reckon it's going to be fun for the EFF to do a podcast, and I hope that everyone gives them a go. Let them try, and also if you don't like it, troll the hell out of them. I mean, that's the nice thing about the media. Is like if you think they're talking nonsense, just like you do when I talk nonsense on the show, go give them hell.
Listen, dude.
Those comments are for everyone to see.
That's what I'm telling you about. It's going to, if nothing else, it's going to give you deep insights, because if there is anybody who's a proper gossip in our political sphere, it is Julius Malema. If it gives you nothing else, it'll give you the gossip that you're just like,
So I'm just looking at all the stuff we have to talk about today. There's so much going on. Let me just quickly give you a preview of what's going to be happening on the Burning Platform. We've got Ian Cameron popping by. Now, I kind of forced Ryan and Dory to get him in because we spoke to him not so long ago. But the reason I want him on is just to cause trouble. I just want him here because you remember our childish, mentally stunted Minister of Police saying not so long ago, shut up. Where he was at a community meeting where Ian Cameron was asking me a question and he was like, shut up, you're calling me a garden boy and all this nonsense. I mean, it's like, it's like going into the nursery school and the stupidest kid in the class
he had a breakdown.
He had a total breakdown, right? He had a total crisis of confidence. You suddenly saw this wounded child up there with all of his insecurities.
I don't think it was a wounded child. I think it is the level of hubris that we deal with our politicians. I think it is just...
I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, okay? No. I'm saying he's not just an arrogant idiot. I'm also saying that deep down inside, there's a desperate need for a big psychoanalysis session, or 733 of them with Dr. Hanan. Like, I think it would be a fascinating way to get into the head, because I'm not completely dismissive of Bheki Cele, right? I think there's something going on there. You don't react like that unless there's a huge amount of pain and insecurity in you. It's just a strange thing. We'll look at it again just now. Anyway, I just want Ian Cameron to come on, tell us if he's received his apology, because
we would know.
Parliament said he should issue an apology.
We would know.
Parliament. Well, I know, but I want to find out from Ian, right? Like maybe Bheki Cele, in a moment of self-reflection, penned a note and sent it to him. We could always hope. So he'll be on later. We also got Mark Shaw popping in. Now, Mark has written a number of incredible books. He's had a number of positions in South African government, civil society, where he's worked on issues of public safety, urban violence, post-apartheid, and he was previously at the National Research Foundation as a professor of justice and security. So he knows quite a lot. He's written books about Pachad, among other things. Remember Pachad in the Western Cape, but also about policing and Cape Town and kind of what happens there and how crime and the underworld works. So he's a very, very interesting man to talk to. So we're going to find out all about that from Mark Shaw in the Burning Platform later. We absolutely will have to touch on what's going on in South Africa in the light of what's happened in Israel, because now, where the international context previous to this was what Canton always brings up, China, India, Russia, Ukraine, America. Now we got to add Israel, Gaza, Hamas, Iran, all of this stuff to it. And I see over the course of the last 24 hours, Hezbollah now joining in from the north. So there's a whole other looming international crisis.
And
which is going to break
out of Qatar, the leader of Hamas has apparently made a pronouncement that, again, Friday the 13th, that there should be an international signing in, joining up of forces of all people who side with Hamas against all people who are on the side of Israel. So like just everyone everywhere in the world.
Okay. This is
death to Israel.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Death, yeah.
No, that's what he says. What are you?
I mean, I'm not laughing because it's funny, because obviously it's not. But it's just like such puerile, low-level stuff. And
from the safety of Qatar, might I add.
Yeah. From a high-rise building in a country that is so far away from the one that he's just plunged into war. It's incredible to me that, can you imagine if your leader left your country after making plans to put your country in a position where there's going to be shelling and destruction and people are going to be fleeing and they can't go anywhere. This border's closed, that border's closed. You basically trap your own civilians in this place, and you then launch an offensive which will have a retaliatory repercussion. And you hightail it to Qatar, and you're like, good luck to you guys. Just forget about everything else for a second and imagine what kind of a person does that. They run away and they hide somewhere where they can be safe, and a couple of the other important leaders can be safe. But everyone in the country, well, you guys just, fend for yourself. We can't be responsible for what happens after we do something which we know will have repercussions. Bizarre. But anyway. So Becky's hat is too tight. I love this, says Congo Chris. It's choking off blood to his brain. You see, from the sublime to the ridiculous, right? And that's what I love about this.
Yes. And we haven't seen him in a long time, Bheki Cele.
No, well.
We haven't seen him in a very long time.
Count your blessings.
A couple of weeks ago, in one of his speeches, Thabo Mbeki, President Thabo Mbeki, spoke about how Bheki Cele shows up everywhere. He says if somebody had stole his boots, Bheki Cele would show up, right? And we haven't seen Bheki Cele show up. There have been lots of things. Over the weekend, there was that huge kind of like heist on the N12. Look, no Bheki Cele to be seen.
Do you think he was hurt by Thabo Mbeki's words?
Listen, there's an almost open out here in Fortsburg. I'm going to name the Joburg things that I can think of. Like out here in Fortsburg, there's videos of like gangs of people with semi-automatic rifles. No Bheki Cele to be seen. There was in Cape Town, actually, there was a high-profile killing. No Bheki Cele. This is crazy. There was in Durban, there was a shootout with some cash in transit. And no Bheki Cele. This is, do you think is sick? Or maybe he lost his hat and he can't be seen out in public without it.
Maybe he's lost his hat, or maybe we should count our blessings and say, well, how could he possibly make the situation better? Realize the answer to that is he couldn't, and move on from that point of view, right?
Then resign.
I mean, we live in hope. What can I tell you?
With all the spate of resignations we're seeing in all sorts of places, all the politicking about rats running underground.
Well, a lot of people are very concerned about, Carl says, it's called a world war. We really don't need that. Well, yes, I'm afraid these things have, unforeseen consequences. And that we don't, like, for the last couple of years, this is something which has escaped most people, with the obvious exception of internecine conflicts in certain states which have always been more or less unstable, or which are coming out of a transition period where they previously were ruled for a very long time by one or other warlord or family or whatever. With the exception of those and the disastrous American experiment in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was all a knee-jerk reaction to 9/11, the Earth has been, at least in moderate zoom out, watch it like an alien point of view terms, at least more or less been peaceful. I mean, for
skirmishes here and there.
For the duration of certainly my life and Phumi's life, I think it's fair to say, we have not seen a global conflict on the scale of that which previous generations may have seen. In fact, you could even argue our parents' generation didn't necessarily, born post-war, World War II, they didn't see that.
Listen, you know what is...
And we're coming out of that now, and people are like, oh, shit. Because you know what happens too, is like all the bad ideas gather, like a sewage pipe that's backed up, right? And then what happens is war forces people to reckon with those ideas, because now suddenly your ideas have costs. Remember, everything on the internet, all the people's opinions, the side that they take in any issue, all of this stuff is inconsequential and comes at zero cost to the person expressing it. And for 50 years, let's say, there's been a backup of really shitty ideas in academia. I was thinking this morning, I'll get back to that point in a second. I was thinking this morning, it's ironic that, the EFF starting their podcast. I saw our friend Penwell has been doing very well with his podcast. I see he had Dalim Pofu's son, Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, on the other day. It's interesting to me that the best arguments and conversations are no longer coming from academia. Academia is stunted completely. It's run out of runway for just the nonsense that, they churn out things like environmental justice and stuff, terminology that just has absolutely no bearing on reality. And you have people with blue hair and like lip piercings shouting about trans rights or whatever else, because they've really run out of stuff to talk about in academia. And now podcasts have become, and people used to say, podcasts are this reserve for people who've been excluded by whatever. Turns out that now podcasts are so mainstream that that's where people campaign for elections and so on. This show has been going for almost 10 years. And people come here because they want to get votes. And they know they're reaching an interested, intelligent audience who can wrangle with ideas. You can't come on this podcast and expect not to have your ideas interrogated.
It's an evolution of media. And I think with
media, but also the absolute failure of academia, because these kinds of discussions don't happen in academia anymore. It's all posturing and performance. I have met supposedly very smart people with many degrees from South African universities who pride themselves at being the cream of the crop in terms of our intelligentsia.
Mm.
I promise you, at the very lowest level of questioning and interrogation, their arguments and positions fall apart like a house of cards because there's no rigor in that process anymore. It's all become showing off to each other. It's like ivory tower stuff, right? It's total nonsense. So podcasting has taken the place of that for people who want to think.
Look, I do hope that even in podcasting, there are somewhere conversations that have rigor, because there are a lot of the conversations that tend to bubble to the top are actually ones that create so much outrage, and it seems almost designed by the podcasters that
Yeah.
some of the vacuous
Clickbait.
things that they're saying
Yeah.
are being said precisely to draw the kind of attention that they draw because they get paid per click or click through or listen or all of that kind of stuff. But I do think that this evolution of this medium has democratized giving people a voice, because truly you don't need a lot of the barriers to entry. The problem with the barriers to entry being low is that you also get quite a lot of shit that comes up in this space, right? So of the millions and millions and millions, and because a lot of people then get stuck in feedback loops that really just reinforce their own biases. Just
of course.
with people that self mutual appreciation societies.
Yeah.
A lot of podcasts are mutual appreciation
They're
societies.
breathing in each other's farts, essentially.
We love each other so much. We love each other's views. Oh my God,
Yeah.
you're so amazing. We see
Oh.
a lot of that too. So
this kind of thing. That's what it is. That's what academia. Academia is a bunch of people who sit there and go like this.
About?
I don't know. It started.
What is that about?
2014, somewhere around there. It started there because this is violence.
Oh, I see.
So you do this rather, which is obviously, it's a very woke thing. I wish I could say I understood all of that stuff. I have observed it, but I don't understand it. I did want to make a point, and I've kind of lost my way here, on the idea that this, before we got into the podcasting, is the place of rigorous discussion part of this. I think what's happening is that a lot of people are looking for substantial, interesting, critical, self-reflective, nuanced approaches to stuff, because what things like Twitter have done, and I would say these short form, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, what they've done is they've given people catchphrases and vox pops and 30-second kind of snapshots of the world. And then if you are the sort of person who is curious about knowing more, it doesn't satisfy you. It makes you itchy, and you want to scratch that itch. So you want to find out a little bit more about this subject or that. And I think that we're entering a phase now where people are going to be a lot more thoughtful. I should certainly hope so.
Oof.
Because we haven't been for the last while. It's all been very binary. You're on my side or you're not. And there's a place for that. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think a lot of stuff has become clouded in numinous nonsense.
Yeah.
And now we need to also get to a point where things are clear. But I think ultimately, this is the point I'm getting to. Thank God I remembered. Ultimately, you are a person who deals with reality, or you're a person who is trying to impose your fantasy on the world. You can come at the world from only those two ways. You can either look at the world, see things as they are, and go, all right, I'm going to make a positive or a negative or a neutral contribution. I'm going to play my part in the real world. I'm going to try to understand things about it, be curious about it and all of that stuff, but I'm going to deal in reality and truth. Or I'm going to live in the world of fantasy and try to impose my fantasy on what I believe is a very fractured, maybe socially constructed reality. You got to kind of decide which group you're in order to be mentally healthy enough to figure out the way forward. And I'll tell you what, there really isn't, it's not a choice between two things. There's only the former, because the latter will only lead you down a path of cognitive dissonance, mental breakdown, constant disappointment. I mean, I just see people, I see people's
constant disappointment.
I see very smart, well-meaning, good people. I see obviously a lot of the opposite too, people who are genuinely full of malice aforethought. But mostly I see people with good intentions who are trying to do the right thing, but they've got such crap ideas and such a disconnect from reality that when things start falling apart in the way that they understand the world, they just lash out. They don't know what else to do, because now everything that they believed is being shown to be nonsense. And sometimes they're very well educated people who've got those nonsense ideas from like professors who've lived in a made up world of theory, or they got them from their parents who just gave them a cursory glance at things, or they got them from their friends who were in a mutual fart sniffing club with them. Oh, I love your ideas. Yeah, I love your ideas. Yeah, let's just keep telling each other how great we are. And at some point you have to meet up with reality. You just have to go, oh shit, hang on. That's how it works. I suddenly understand why I have no money, or why I have no sleep at night, or why I feel terrible, or why I'm eating such shit, or I get it now. And when they do, you can almost see like there's this, I can start rebuilding from reality.
Sure. But
is that a lot? Am I going in?
No, although I do think it takes an extraordinary amount of bravery to be able to be one of those people who are willing to, at this time, put themselves on the line with honest, hard truths. Because like now, we've spoken about being cancelled. We've spoken about the trolls. We were talking about the trolls, because that's also what happens to a lot of people, right? As you then stand your ground, as you have this uncomfortable view based in reality with all the facts and sharing it out there. Yay! The kind of backlash. So it does take just like it takes an extraordinary amount of bravery for each one of us, be quiet and still, as Steve Biko would say, in the sanctity of the toilet. Really consider what is real and what is not, and the truth of one's life. It's a hard thing. It's much easier and much nicer to
live in fantasy,
to be in the fantasy and with all of your people that reinforce your fantasy. But
just to prove that I'm not a boring person. I had this discussion with two people. I wouldn't say they're friends. I've known one of them for a while. The other one I met very recently, guy and a girl, and we were having a conversation a couple of days ago about Foucault. So I am boring. Because they were both philosophy majors.
Oh, wow.
And we had this conversation about Foucault. And I told, because they were both acolytes of Foucault's work, and had read it extensively, and I am not. I have a very shallow understanding of what he was writing. Absolutely. But I take an interest because I have seldom read anything that was more stupid than anything Foucault wrote. And I say that with humility. I don't think I'm cleverer than him, but I just know for a fact that he's a lot dumber than any of the other stuff I've read. Like, it's just hot air, like all of it. And I said, I just asked this question. I was like, name a single thing that he wrote or said, or that postmodernism as a whole, as a movement, has delivered to the planet Earth, which has allowed us to improve society, to build something, to invent something. to add value to something. Just one, if you can identify one thing, let's say some idea of Foucault's led to an innovation in, I don't know, the development of lenses. Or I'm trying to be as abstract as someone who's a fan of Foucault would be, right? Show me a way, even if it's a very, very thin, paper thin chain of causality between a Foucaultian idea and something in society that has dramatically improved as a result. Crickets. And these are two people who've read the material and would consider themselves to be disciples of that nonsense. And people who I like. I mean, there's nothing not to like about them except that they just they would read nonsense for hours and hours and somehow find it. I don't know. And I did also explain to them that it's like a thing where people who think they're smart read this stuff and then talk to other people they think are smart, and then they blow smoke up each other's assholes, like you said. It's like such a waste of time. If anyone who's listening to this show now, because I don't doubt that there are smart people here, has ever read anything that Foucault wrote that you could say resulted in something truly positive, socially progressive, and I don't mean in a theoretical sense or as some contribution to the way people talk or think. I mean like they've taken someone who was poor and made them rich, or they've helped a family that was broken up, or they've made a watch work better, or helped us to identify an epoch of history that we were ignorant of. Of course the answer is going to be no.
But you know what the amazing thing so far about humanity is that we've always been in a pendulum that corrects, you know?
Do you mean good ideas, shit ideas? Good ideas, shit ideas. Well, we know where Foucault is, right?
We're kind of, and it swings back. We're currently in an age of complete, like, self-indulgent navel gazing.
Yes.
And it's almost like being 2-year-olds. But I have faith. I have faith in humanity, and that time will sway back to a place where we do care about
where the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, in the words of Martin Luther King, right?
I do.
I hope you're right. Because this week, I am afraid my feelings about humanity have bottomed out a little bit. I'm afraid. So lots of things to get to today. And
I felt that in your letter.
You did?
Yeah.
You did? It's getting quite our website crashed last night, so I want to apologize to anybody who wouldn't be the first time.
I saw that at 2 a.m.
Yeah, we had people from all over the world sending us emails. Hey, your website's not working.
Sending emails.
We had to wake people up to check what was going on with the website.
Okay. I think the that kind of feeling that it's bottomed out, kind of like the rug being, is simply because none of us saw Saturday coming. We did not see Saturday coming. Considering that a week or so before, Saudi Arabia, who would have ever thought, Saudi Arabia and Israel sitting down to talk and
why do you think this came out of? Do you think it came out of nowhere?
Abrahamic Accords.
Just hang on,
and then
join those dots quickly, because I mean, this is such an obvious thing, right? The penny drops. So at the moment that Saudi Arabia and Israel are about to make historic advances in what used to be called the Arab-Israeli conflict, at that moment where Prince Mohammed bin Salman, his vision of the Middle East becoming an important economic bloc, a place of innovation where people work and cooperate together and they put aside historic differences. This is what he said. I'm not making any of this up myself. At that moment, suddenly the Ayatollahs go, it's time to press go on that plan. The Hamas leadership have said that they were planning this for 2 years. And
they must have been. I mean, just the way it all so the timing played out.
Timing is not incidental.
I was just like, and this is what happens when everybody is so distracted by like internal machinations of politics, because everyone was so distracted by the issue of Netanyahu in Israel that nobody was looking and they were vulnerable. It's like
I spoke to a Jewish friend of mine this week who said to me he hates what's happened. Obviously, he's very, very upset about everything that's taken place. But he said the funny thing is that for the first time in ages, he could say, like, Jews are suddenly starting to come together. This always happens when there's a conflict. You know, it's like we joked on the show the other day about how the minute some American started lecturing us in South Africa about the word colored, everyone in South Africa got like together, black, white, colored, Indian. We were like, just back right off, American. Just like we stood together. Now that's a very facile example, but you know, it's the same here. So again, unforeseen consequences. Some of them are going to be hideous and disgusting and destructive and full of death and war. And some of those consequences are going to bring people together and let them put aside their differences. Suddenly, everything aligns on the enemy or allies axis. And at least there's clarity there. At least there's clarity. So for those people who have like been bored to death by the last 10 minutes of me talking about Foucault, you will have clarity soon, my friends. None of this will matter. And whether that's good or bad,
we hope that a year from now, none of this matters.
I certainly do. I really do. And I want to regain the faith that Phumi has in humanity in the next couple of days, months, years, however long it takes. All right, so let's get cracking. We got so many interesting comments here from people. So is Saudi Arabia going to put Israel back on the map? What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Sanele, are you? I don't know if
Good
that's
morning,
sarcastic.
Sanele.
Yeah, I don't know if Sanele's just had his first drink of the day because he sometimes boasts about that.
I saw was it a tweet or somebody posted something that a diet from the 70s that was in
from the 70s.
Maybe Cosmopolitan.
Hang on, wait.
You have to hear this.
I got to come down from the nonsense we were just.
You have to hear this.
You were going to tell me about a diet from the 70s.
You just listen to me. For breakfast, 2 eggs.
Too expensive in this country.
A glass of white wine. 1 glass.
Yeah.
Of white wine.
Yes.
And a cup of coffee.
Okay.
And for lunch.
Okay.
2 boiled eggs. Or you can make them poached.
Eggs again.
2 glasses of white wine.
This is a diet.
And a cup of coffee. And for supper, a grilled steak.
Okay.
Some vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And the last bit of wine. Because you can have 1 bottle a day.
So it's a bottle a day. So first of all, let me just point out that thanks to Enoch Godongwana and all the finance ministers before him, wine is very expensive for South Africans. So
it's still cheaper than eggs, yo.
Unless you're drinking the really cheap stuff that comes in a box. And eggs are outrageously expensive. That 70s diet would bankrupt us today.
It would bankrupt you today. But I did think it was quite interesting that there was a women's magazine out in the 70s encouraging housewives.
Yeah, it was also encouraging
to be like
it was also encouraging
tipsy all day.
It was also encouraging leg warmers.
That was the 80s. The leg warmers was the 80s.
The 70s. I'm trying to think. It was before my time.
Do you understand?
What are we talking about fashion-wise? In a
3 glasses of wine by 2:00 in the afternoon. Hello.
Well, now you know why the 80s was such a disaster. But tell me what were people doing in the 70s? That because I wasn't there for it.
Well, neither was I.
What were women wearing? What were women wearing?
Sensible clothes that covered lots of things, like covered everything, and lots of belts. When I see the stuff that I see on TV, it was lots of belts. Always lots of like thick belts that like cinched the waist. But people were, I don't know what men were up to in the 70s, but they were obviously onto some shit because women were drinking wine at breakfast, having like, this is also the time
They were
when
probably
things like Prozac
they were probably
became
dancing.
big,
They were probably
right?
dancing at Studio 54 and reading Foucault. That's the problem.
Listen, women were needing all sorts of help to deal with life. They were
Jesus.
like popping all sorts of,
Jesus.
because all those pills, all those like
Yeah.
calming pills
Acid.
were big.
And
were
acid.
big. Men must
Huge
have been up
amounts
to
of
some
acid.
nonsense.
All right, Phumi, you don't know about this, but I was very happy to have been informed some time ago by Congo Chris about Fat Bear Week 2023. So this is where
What?
a number of bears competed in brackets. You know, like the World Cup of cricket, which is on at the moment, or of rugby, which is on at the moment. Had a bracket of all the most famous fat bears in America. And I mean actual bears.
Actual bears.
And
like
we have
the real thing.
Yeah, we looked at some of them from the website. And the winner was announced this week. First, we'll go to the runner-up.
Are you going to show me pictures?
Here's Chunk, who's the runner-up in Fat Bear Week.
That's quite a stomach there, Chunk.
Chunk is only the runner-up, but look at his face. Chunk looks like he suffers from serious depression. Okay, Chunk needs what's the antidepressant? Prozac. He needs that river must be full of Prozac because Chunk is having a hard time. Okay, could be something to do with Chunk's overall lack of fitness, and maybe catching salmon is a lot harder when you're that big. Who knows? But the winner of Fat Bear Week, I'm glad to announce this morning, is Grazer.
Wow.
That's Grazer, the big winner of Fat Bear Week.
Look at that thigh.
Look at those thighs. And look at that trunk.
Yo.
Chunk the before and Grazer the winner.
No, Chunk is just...
You prefer Chunk?
No, Chunk just has a pot belly. He's like a... He's like a South African politician.
I know what's happening
with
here.
Like
a South African politician.
It's just the belly.
Chunk is like a South
Chunk
African.
is just the belly. Chunk is just the belly. You see, look at Chunk.
Boop.
Chunk is just a
boop.
Umkaba. Yeah, Chunk is just a Umkaba. But Grazer, on the other hand, is fully, look at that rump.
You know what's happened? You know what this is? We are no longer allowed to have actual beauty pageants where we can objectify women and men. Now what we've got is we have to transfer anthropomorphically our need to objectify things to bears. That's why we have Fat Bear Week. It was never a thing 10 years ago. I guarantee you this did not exist. The way you've just spoken about Chunk and Grazer is the way most of us should be speaking about each other in an objective sense, but we're not allowed to anymore. So we now transfer that to bears. This is a sad state of things, I have to say. So well done for our winners. Grazer's got thunder thighs. You see, look, Sanella's climbing back in here. Mike Drop says, Grazer looks ready for the big sleep. If Gwede was a bear, says Virus.
That would be Chunk.
Chunk?
That would be Chunk.
Pablo even says, Chunk looks South African. All right. Thank God we went.
Who starts things like that? Fat Bear Week.
It's a social movement, and it's as a result of the fact that we're not allowed to talk like this about people anymore.
Because those bears are getting ready for the big sleep.
Absolutely.
I don't know
100%.
if I don't know if Chunk's thighs are going to survive the big sleep. His stomach will, but his thighs might.
We will see. All right. So you can join us in the comments. You can also pass this on. Listen, by the way, it's time for me to leverage you again. You know, like that Bernie Sanders meme where it's time for me to ask you for money again. You know how they do that. I'm not going to ask you for money. Today is a good day for you to share the podcast with everyone you know, the people you love, the people you hate, the people who argue with you, the people you agree with, your friends, your family, your lovers, your ex-lovers, people that you would never want to be seen dead with. You share it with everybody because it's time to kick this thing into high gear. And I love the people who listen to this show. I love you. I love you. I love you. But you do absolutely fuck all for me. And I'm here every day for you. I don't charge you. I don't charge you any money. Get off your chunk backside today and pass this podcast on to at least 3 people or I will have issue with you tomorrow again. And if this continues,
No,
I will stop coming here. I will stop
pass it
coming
to
into the
5
studio.
people. Pass it to 5 people.
Nah,
use it as practice
3,
because
5.
use it as practice because later we'll be asking you to convince at least 5 people to go and vote.
We'll do that too. I'm serious. It's time for you to do something. If you enjoy this show, you do this for me, please. You pass on this podcast to 3 to 5 people. Phumi says 5, I say 3. I always have a lower expectation. That way I'm never unhappy about the result. But between 3 and 5 people. So please get on it. John says in his defense, he says, I've been sharing you in groups for years on Facebook, Gareth. You need my son's help. So his son is an expert on like getting YouTube hits. Well, tell him. I mean, let's test it out.
YouTube hits.
John, put your son on this. If he can prove he can do something to the algorithm and the metrics, maybe we even hire him. But he's got to prove it, right? So take screenshots, deliver evidence, show us what you're doing. We want to see your homework. We want to see his work, and then we'll talk. Okay, I'm not averse to the idea of bringing in some young whiz who understands how to make YouTube churn out the right numbers. Do what you have to do, but get on it. We've got smart people who listen to the show. Do your work. Come on.
Yay.
Right. It is 7 o'clock, which means we've got to take a quick break. We'll be back with Burning Platform. It feels like 5
already.
Feels like 5 seconds since we started the show. So let's go, everybody. I need to take this break. We need to get everything ready. We got Mark coming in just now. We're going to talk about his book called Breaking the Bombers, How the Hunt for Pugad Created a Crack Police Unit. And that is, of course, Mark Shaw, also Ian Cameron joining us, and lots of other good stuff on the Burning Platform. If there's something you want us to talk about, send us an email, either gareth@cliffcentral.com, or you could just drop it in the comments section here. We look at and pay attention to all the comments, of course. Most of them. Most of them, not all.
Only the mutual appreciation type.
No. In fact, I'm always more interested in the critical ones, but yeah, bring it on.
With those cable breaks, the biggest problem was effectively how those cables had been put into the sea in the first place. So, for example, Sat3, you've got 2002, I think the knowledge there in terms of laying cables was rather slim. So let's be fair on it. We give the guys kudos where we can, right? So they laid it about 400 kilometers offshore from Africa along the coast there. And Wax kind of followed suit very similarly that way. It's only been later that we found out that the Congo River has got quite a long, or should I say, a very strong flow. And what happens is when there's a lot of rain, the flow, from the river comes into the sea, and it actually pushes the rocks and boulders on the, seashore.
No ways.
Yeah, and those boulders actually effectively snag the cable and they break the cable.
And so, so what you're saying is 400 kilometers is not far enough or not deep enough.
It wasn't far enough, yeah. So like I said, the guys didn't know that then. Now we do. So, for example, with Equiano, we've laid Equiano about 1,000 kilometers, 1,200 kilometers offshore. So it doesn't get affected so much from that, push from the water effectively.
Thanks for listening to Unbundled, brought to you by Catalytic, a series that aims to demystify technology so that you can make smarter decisions for your business. Remember that you can listen to all of the episodes on the Cliff Central app or website, and for added convenience, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you're looking for help with communications tools in your business, please visit catalytic.co.za.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
We always speak about the true cost of an EV. And I think a lot of people don't understand what that is. And this paper was it was a study that was done in Australia, which was looking at which countries have the cheapest running costs of an electric vehicle. And I found it quite interesting to see where South Africa landed there.
Well, a cost of our electricity in relation to petrol you
Yeah.
can see on that list is massive.
Mm.
The cost of electricity is a lot lower. That gap will narrow.
Mm.
So chances are we will get higher electricity costs in the future. Now, also bear in mind that this study was calculated based on a situation where our petrol prices are very, very high at the moment. Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
Right. It is Thursday morning. It is time for the Burning Platform. And this is our moment to get into current affairs, all the big stories of the week. We often invite guests who we think are useful and interesting commentators who have a take on things that will help the rest of us to understand stuff. Sometimes we have people who've written amazing books. Sometimes we have both in one person. And today is such a day. We will be joined in a short while also by Ian Cameron, who I really only wanted to get him on just to find out whether Bheki Cele has apologized yet for all the things he said. And when our producers were talking to Ian and mentioned that we're going to have our guest Mark Shaw, and he said, "Oh, wow, I've read a lot of his stuff and I often quote him." So it all comes together this morning beautifully. So Mark, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Mark Shaw is our guest this morning, along with Phumi and I, and with you, to talk about all of the things that are in the news. But Mark has just written a book called Breaking the Bombers. It's an interesting story about how the hunt for Pagad created a crack police unit. That's the actual subtitle of the book. And we'll find out about that in a minute. But how are you?
I'm good,
thanks. Just pull that microphone a little bit closer.
There
Thank
you go.
so much. That's excellent. So, Mark, you've written a number of things over your time, and I also want to just give people an idea of who you are and what you did before this. You're the director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack in that.
Sure.
We'll get to it in a second. You were also previously the National Research Foundation Professor of Justice and Security at the University of Cape Town. You worked for 10 years at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, so plenty to discuss there too. And you've had a number of positions in the South African government and civil society where you've worked on issues of public safety and urban violence in the post-apartheid transition. So I want to avoid the temptation to immediately generalize the conversation and talk about crime, the war on drugs, international crime, Interpol, policing in South Africa. Let's just focus on your book for a second so that we can give that the appropriate attention it deserves. It's obviously something you've worked on for some time. So a lot of us have to stretch a little to remember Pagad. It was a big,
I was
big
in high
thing,
school.
right? You were in high school?
I was in high school when
this
that was
became
a thing.
Mm. So just remind everybody, because perhaps that's the context in which we need to understand the book.
Yeah. Pagad was a very important phenomenon in the immediate post-democratic society, Gareth. And there was this upsurge of response to crime on the Cape Flats. Drugs had been pouring into the country in the course of the transition. But Pagad turned extraordinarily violent, assassinating gang bosses, members of criminal groups.
There was the famous bombing of that pizza place in Cape Town.
Exactly,
Yeah.
St. Elmo's. And then and then there were 400 bomb blasts in Cape Town. So just think of that now, 400 bomb blasts. 20 of those were against civilian and state targets. The most notorious, I suppose, was the waterfront bomb of August 1998, but that was one of 3 bombs at the waterfront. And as the book recounts, there were some failed bombings, so very big car bombings against a gay bar, the Bronx, which didn't go off properly. I think would have been the biggest bomb in South African history, honestly. But they got the explosives mix wrong. So it was this very big security threat emerging, a couple of years after 1994. And the state was, I would say, confused, not exactly sure what to deal with it. The focus was on community policing. So the initial response was to talk to these guys. Indeed, Pagad had a lot of community support initially.
Just remind us also, Pagad, what was their thing? It wasn't just gangsters or the name was People Against Gangsterism and Drugs.
Correct.
That's what it stood for. But that's not what
they said they stood for.
Is that what they stood for? Who were Pagad?
I think the book makes the argument that the core group that had formed Pagad were from an organization called Kibla, which had not supported the transition to democracy, sort of a radical Islamic oriented group who had a lot of sympathy with the Iranian Revolution, and they were looking for a constituency. Now, I don't want to say that people supported Pagad. I would say people supported Pagad because they wanted to respond to drugs, gangs, which was a legitimate response.
And continue to be issues which affect those communities more than anyone else in South Africa. In the Cape Flats, it's still the number one thing. But it is apposite that we're talking about this.
Yeah.
And you've drawn a couple of parallels. I don't want to stretch it too far between the events of this past weekend on a global scale and some of the events that South Africa was dealing with in a microcosm back in those days. What does your book tell us about how big this was and how far it went, and what the conclusions with a little bit of hindsight and the rearview mirror effect? What have we learned? Have we learned anything from the way Pagad rose and then kind of disappeared?
It's a good question. I think the first issue is that crime, insecurity is a point of mobilization for people, and that mobilization is both good and bad. It's good because actually, indeed, we do need to mobilize against crime, insecurity, and the like, and it was and is a huge issue in Cape Town and around the country. But vigilantism often turns pretty nasty. And in this case, the justification of the core group was, well, the state is in bed with the gangsters. And of course, there's evidence of state, of police corruption and a linkage. You know, the state is doing more to defend the gangsters than us, the ordinary.
That was the assertion then, and it is now.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And so this was when the campaign turned to focus on the state, civilian targets, the Weinberg Synagogue, etc. Just a whole plethora of targets outside of what you would ordinarily think an anti-crime campaign would be.
So tell us more about this crack squad that was created and what has since happened to them.
Well, what happened essentially is that the state didn't and couldn't define what Pagad was. So they stretched out to work with them at first. They tried, there was an attempt at negotiation. That kind of fell apart. And as the threat, and then there was a kind of internal assessment in the state that Pagad was growing into a key threat to state security. And this key moment, and the moment is really the waterfront. There's sort of key moments. One is the killing of Stachy, the burning outside his house.
Stachy, I remember that. There were still waves of consequence from that up until just a few years ago.
Absolutely. This is a defining moment. Pagad got a lot of public support for that. The waterfront bombing is the next, I would say, key moment where support begins to move away. The state becomes extremely concerned. Pagad never claims responsibility for the bombs. I think this is an important point to say. And in fact, there's a lot of misinformation about who planted the bombs. And a lot of survivors I spoke to still don't know. They still want to talk to the bombers. They want to know what was their objective at the time. You know, people lost legs, have been badly injured. Their lives have been dramatically changed by these explosions. So it basically became something the state termed, correctly, I would argue, an urban terror campaign. But the state wasn't really able and ready to respond. And the detectives working on it, the cases were simply not being cracked. There wasn't a strategic response to what was going on. There were very few arrests until a sort of group of people stepped forward and began to work together, and that's the beginning of IDOC. So the book mentions Percy Son and others. And in this period, 1998 to 2001, is a whole lot of innovation takes place in the South African criminal justice system, converting from an old system of policing into a new one.
Those are words we haven't heard for a long time.
Indeed, and that's the point of the book. And in a sense, the old system wasn't appropriate for policing in a new democratic framework. There was a lot of calls at the time, you may remember, for detention without trial to be returned. In fact, I was speaking to detectives at the time who were saying, well, we can't confront this threat. We need detention without trial again. We need harder laws to be able to deal with it. IDOC was the beginnings of the Scorpions, this idea of combining prosecutors, investigators, intelligence folk into a more cohesive, independent response. The problem was solved largely on the intelligence front, I would say. It wasn't a perfect success. And the book recounts what I think is a very important story of how the last bomb was the state intervened to stop the bombing of a pub in Belleville, would also have caused a lot of injury and loss of life. The bombers, bar two, who bombed the Lansdowne police station, none of the other bombers served. They may have been in prison, but they never served time or were convicted for the bombing. So the core group of bombers is around 6 or 7 people. Those guys have never served time.
How old are they now?
I would say they're in their 40s, 50s, maybe a bit older.
I'd be interested to know what their backgrounds were, right? Because today we were talking earlier about cash in transit heists, and we saw the videos on social media of that very highly publicized bombing of the truck on the N12 and bombs are a special weapon. Right. And there's a level of training that needs to go with it. So I'd be interested to know about these bombers who never served time and what kind of training they had and where they came from.
It's a very interesting question. Essentially, the knowledge for making the bombs came from guys a small group of guys, 2 or 3, who had received training pre-94 as part of the liberation struggle. So these guys, Kibler had been aligned to the PAC. They had got foreign training around to do that. They passed that knowledge on to a wider group of guys who became the core group of bombers. So there was a sort of training around the making of pipe bombs. As they turned to civilian targets, they began to experiment, with timers, with different mixes of materials. Hence, the big car bomb at the Bronx didn't go off. So it was both learning, before the days of the internet where you could sometimes look these things up. It was self-learning plus learning that people already had passed into this core group. Now, the core group is not necessarily linked to the wider movement of Pagad, which had a lot of support, and then support started to dissipate. I think the community of Cape Town clearly were uncomfortable in the direction where this was going, although, again, to make the point, they never claimed responsibility. So, but it was pretty clear, and it remains clear to me that indeed they were responsible.
I do think that this would make fascinating reading. Breaking the Bombers is the name of the book. I'll put a picture of the cover of that book up here so you can see it right now. Mark Shaw's latest work. Brilliant, compelling, and important, says Justice Malala, who's a regular here on the Burning Platform with us. So, Mark, I want to bring in Ian Cameron at this point, mostly just because I like stirring and causing trouble. Ian knows this. Ian, it's always good to see you, and I see you've been all over the news lately, not always for great reasons, and by that I don't mean things that you've done to yourself, but I mean that there's so much going on at the moment that is just a mess in terms of policing, criminal justice. You must have heard what Mark said just now about those early days of Pagad and what that meant to the Western Cape in terms of policing. You deal with so many people in the Western Cape police now. Mark says that there was, in fighting Pagad, the emergence of this incredible crack unit, which somehow seems to have been one of the few successes in the police in South Africa post-apartheid. But the police at the moment, you could say, have gone backwards from what Mark is saying. Would you agree with that?
Good morning, Gareth. Good morning, guys. Unfortunately, I think it has gone backwards quite a bit. And I mean, we can go on for days. Mark, when I read Give Us More Guns, in fact, it's probably the number one reference that I use so very often when it comes to criminality in the police. Involvement from the police's side, not only in actively committing certain offences, but literally giving the tools to criminals in order to be able to commit the offences. Last week I was in Mitchell's Plain, Lentegeer area, And it's known all around that both of those stations, and Lentegeur lately quite a bit, has some kind of a criminal involvement. And it's very, very difficult to work at those stations and to work with some of the cops, because even though there are so many good cops at those very stations that we work with really well, it takes such a long time to build a trust relationship, because you really don't know who you can trust, or who might be family with the wrong person or friends with the wrong person. But yeah, Gareth, I think we're in for a rough ride. I listened to the police minister and his briefing just about 2 weeks ago, and they were releasing information, or he was speaking of successes, and some of the successes were good successes, and I think we need to give credit where credit is due. What bothers me, though, and I think Mark would be able to also elaborate on it, but what bothers me is that we have this way of speaking about, huge numbers of arrests that are made. We speak about all these, so-called operations, say, for example, like with the Zamazamas, but we don't see any form of conviction. And when you guys spoke about the whole Scorpion model just now, it just brought back the idea of how crucial that integrated or synchronized effort is from all the entities involved. And I think that's where we're lacking. We these kind of one-hit wonders in terms of arrests, but then it falls flat, and we see the same criminal back out on the street.
We can only imagine how frustrating that is for those police who are trying to do their jobs, because then they do their jobs and it all falls apart after they've executed their responsibilities. But you bring up the police chief, so let's just remind ourselves of what happened not so long ago. You were at a community meeting. This took place.
Take any nonsense of somebody regarding me as a gathering boy today, because you regard me as a gathering boy. You come here, shut up! Shut up! I sat here, I listened.
Anyway, we don't need to watch the whole thing. Have you received your apology? Because Parliament ordered him to make an apology to you.
No, I haven't. But I must be honest,
I'm
Gareth.
so disappointed. I was holding out hope. Ask Phumi. I even said, maybe you got a handwritten note with a box of chocolates or something. Nothing.
And I bet Phumi told you that it's not going to happen. No, look, it's very quiet. In fact, he said he's going to appeal the decision now, which is so silly. Just in terms of a political move.
To waste time appealing a decision on an apology. But okay, yeah, Phumi, you want to say?
No,
you want to say something?
Because Ian raises something interesting for me about the police stations that are well known to have involvement with the criminal element.
Yeah,
and also makes me think back to very famously Bheki Cele and how he had very deep connections to the criminal underworld, and how much of that has then steeped into the police force and created a police force that, by and large, is not interested in any kind of law enforcement, in your view.
Yeah.
I must say, one of the things that I think in the Western Cape, but not only, that has bred corruption is the system of informers, like the very system of crime intelligence. And when you look at the gang system, there's an interface between the police and the gangs, which has occurred over a long period of time. Gang bosses as informers, people being paid off by the state, and money talking in these arrangements, money going both ways. And I think we need to understand that when we understand how policing has turned out, particularly in places like the Cape Flats, because it's a cash economy, it's a drug economy, and that's damaged the police over time. And the gangs do it deliberately. They pick people who are influential, who may have decisions around dockets. They begin slowly in the process of corruption. So this has damaged. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's a phenomenon that has become much more serious over time. And the point I want to make is it was inbuilt into the system.
But then if I ask you to just pull back into your international experience as well. I mean, we've all watched Narcos. We know. Well, it's not just Narcos because it is what it is. It's just very, very well dramatized, right? But if you think about places like Mexico, where we know that the gangs own the politicians because campaigning is expensive, right? And so they have the money. In your international experience, how does the rest of the world deal with this, if at all? You know, is this just the way that the world works now?
These are hugely challenging issues, and you put your finger on it. That, you know, we've just released a global index of organized crime where South Africa doesn't do well. But what that index shows, in a enormous number of countries, getting close to 3/4, there is state protection and involvement around organized crime. So the state is a vector in the criminal economy. We think of the state as being good and the criminals being bad, but often to varying degrees, people within the state for money and other reasons protect criminal elements. And the solution, frankly, and the second point to make on the index is that democracies are much better at fighting organized crime. They're vulnerable in some ways, in the political party funding, but they're much better than authoritarian states. In fact, in authoritarian states, or more like authoritarian states, the state takes over criminal markets because that becomes the biggest criminal group in town.
Okay.
So
that's an interesting finding. I would not have thought that.
And it's kind of the biggest group on the block, and the state then extracts money, patronage from the criminal economy.
They come into a mutually beneficial
arrangement. Exactly. With the state being dominant, and you can, very good example arguably is developments in Russia over time, but not only. So the point is, in democracies, what do you need as a solution? Free media is crucial, what you guys do, right? It's exposing, debating, putting the issue on the agenda. Independent law enforcement, and I think that's where the book is going, and I think that's where where the innovation in South Africa has to come from.
What does that mean, independent law enforcement?
It means law enforcement which is resourced, led, and outside of political control. So there are ways to structure and do that, and I think that's where we have to aim in the context.
Let me bring Ian in on this then. I mean, that makes sense to you. I saw you nodding along, Ian. What do you have to add to what Mark just said, and perhaps also bring in, through your experience on the ground, what you think may be viable solutions going forward in this particular realm that we're talking about with Mark?
So I think it's crucial that the state doesn't have the centralized monopoly on safety and security. It's absolutely crucial. I think that's one of the reasons why the Scorpions functioned well. I think the main reason for it having been disbanded, as we've seen with many other specialized type of efforts, was that the ruling party or whoever else was involved in organized crime would not be able to get away with it were those bodies successful. Hence the reason that someone like Minister Bheki Cele stays in the position that he's in. So what I've seen, and I mean, this comes from the mouths of so many South African Police Service members, is that they keep on even asking through us, is there any way that they can get quicker access to go to City of Cape Town to work in Metro Police, or to join some kind of another municipal or provincial law enforcement body? The problem with it is that, let's rather say the positive first. It does work well. It does make an impact. The problem with it is it's a very cosmetic impact, and I don't think it's a long-term solution, because the criminals just hold back a bit. They watch, they learn, and then they just adapt their operations accordingly. And the thing is, these bodies aren't able to actually do prosecution. So they can't go straight to the MPA or to the DPP. They must hand over the docket to the South African Police Service, and that's where it falls flat again. So I just think it's crucial that, we have different bodies. They might have slightly different roles, but the one keeps the other accountable. It's almost like healthy competition. You've got different angles, eyes and ears that form part of this approach. Something like PRASA, let's use that as an example. They've got a peace officer body that was mainly trained by the private sector in South Africa. They are peace officers that can do certain things. They've got a mandate to do it, and they could actually make a huge impact on something like theft and other organized crime around Transnet specifically. The problem with it, though, is that the police minister wouldn't give certain other entities the same peace officer status. They just deny them access to it. And eventually you come back to this problem where the state has the alone centralized monopoly through SAPS.
I have to ask this because that sounds great, but we already have the biggest private security network in the country.
Private armies.
They're still mostly unable to stop any kind of real crime. The government is highly unlikely, Ian and Mark and Phumi and everyone else. Government's not going to hand over their monopoly of violence to anyone else, or their ability to determine how the enforcement of law takes place. They would rather be incompetent at it and withhold their power than let someone else be competent at it and give that up.
And they proved it, right? They proved it when they didn't come back with a reservist model that functioned. They proved it when they disbanded something like the commandos. Not necessarily the best solutions, but at least it gave some kind of a different statutory power to communities and other bodies. The thing is, Gareth, that the private security industry, again, it feels like a cosmetic fix. It doesn't solve the root cause of the issue. It's like sticking a plaster on a wound.
Listen, don't get me wrong. I'm not a statist in any way, shape, or form, but I do get nervous about the idea of any of that monopoly of violence, as I call it, being handled by private companies or individuals, because we know how that can very quickly lead to militia, to
who controls
gangsters, and frankly, I'd rather see the enemy in a position in the government than not know the enemy as some shadowy figure operating in society for their own benefit and executing that power in an arbitrary and capricious way.
Well, I suppose, Ian brings up the issue of community reservists.
Yeah.
And we spoke earlier about the community's dual role with Pagat, right? Where initially they seemed to support it, but then realized that they're actually a threat. So what kind of role can communities play in being part of the solution, if any?
Can I make just a point on vigilantism generally, because I think it's an important one related to the Pagat book.
Sure.
In our experience around the world, Gareth, what often happens with violent vigilante groups, Pagat's an example, the sort of militias in Brazil are an example, is that they themselves become criminal. And why is that? Because in the case of Pagat, they would shoot a gangster, and what would they find? Drugs and cash in his house. They would take it.
Yeah.
And so your point on being able to see the state and have some form of accountability is very, very important. That doesn't mean communities shouldn't be engaged in assisting and supporting and engaging in crime prevention. But there's a kind of red line where vigilante groups armed cross the line. And then you have multiple armed militias and others who almost inevitably become criminalized. And so I think that's a very important point in the overall context of this discussion. I think what the book tries to say is that we need, when I say an independent investigative body, what best practice shows is, yes, you can give some political control around the strategy, the focus, etc., but you build essentially a body with operational independence, with a board of the great and the good that looks after it, who targets the key criminal actors within the country. It's likely to require a constitutional change in the context of South Africa to do, but this is the solution that countries have adopted where there's this meshing between politics and organized crime. Of course, the political elite is reluctant to do this because they are targeted, and what happened to the Scorpions we know. But this is part of the solution, And you need protections because, of course, that independent or law enforcement body itself can become abusive. So you need these checks and balances built into the system. And we don't have that now, I'm afraid to say, in relation to our response to organized crime.
I see a comment from Sanele here, which I think is also instructive. And maybe, guys, if we can just look at this for a second, and then I do want to focus on the Western Cape, which is an area that both of you have particularly useful insight in, because there's also an ongoing battle between the provincial government and the national, and how much policing can the provincial pay for and order around, and how much can the national government be involved. Obviously, is a power tussle.
But it also looks like in the Western Cape, there is an incredibly sophisticated criminal element that has infiltrated from an international perspective. So not just, so it's not just like drug runners in the Cape Flats. If you consider that a couple of months ago, Interpol intersected a very well-known criminal.
I do want to look at that. I'm going to give you all a chance to respond to it. But Sanele's comment, I think, is useful too. It's like intelligence, he says, is a myth to this government. They operate on guesses. Now, we pay for the national, what is it called? The NIA, right? National Intelligence Agency. These are the people who had no idea when the riots broke out in KZN. They had no idea when half the things that have happened to the country since then happened. Is this a body that we're just paying for that's really just another sheltered employment place for cadres, or is it actually a useful institution that delivers meaningful intelligence and helps law enforcement?
I mean, I think the big weakness we have, which has been said many times, is in the crime intelligence area. I think this is an area, as I've tried to suggest, where there is a lot of corruption, because of course it's driven by money. It's not very transparent for obvious reasons. I don't think there's there may be sources and other things. There are sources and other things being run, but the results are generally very poor. And I think there's not really a strategic understanding of the level of threat we face here of organized crime. I don't think the government fully understands, and that's what we've been saying in our index, just how big the organized crime threat to South Africa is.
There's a theme coming here. There's a theme building here in so many ways. Just a lack of understanding, a lack of any kind of sophisticated thought put into all kinds of things, whether it's maintenance of electricity infrastructure, whether it's crime intelligence. Do you want to add anything to that, Ian, with your experience with intelligence in the police, intelligence in national security?
I think it's important to say that it's not necessarily always that it's completely dysfunctional. It might be dysfunctional for what we want it to be. It might be dysfunctional for what we would like to see in terms of combating organized crime as we see it. But I think it's been very well manipulated to suit a certain political ideal, and it's been misused and abused several times, as we've seen before. The infamous grabber deal from the previous national commissioner, even with Fikile Mbalula's involvement, etc., where intelligence, whether it's crime intelligence, national intelligence, it doesn't actually matter. They've abused those bodies for a specific political purpose. So it's become a little bit of an iron fist. It's almost like how the Presidential Protection Services don't report to the same divisional commissioner in the police as all the other protection services do.
It's like a Gestapo or a KGB.
Exactly.
Well, and all of the iterations, starting with the Scorpions, changing.
In fact, sorry, I just want to correct myself there. There's more like a Stasi than either of those.
The latest iteration being the SIU, which sits in the presidency, and looking at the kinds of cases that they pursue and who they pursue, looks a lot like a politically charged environment.
I take the point. I think the SIU does pretty good work. I think generally, however, the response from the state is very fragmented. There's an organized crime unit in the police now dealing with organized crime. There's the Hawks. There's a new body within the NPA, etc.
New body in the NPA. I mean, again.
And so the point is generally, in a way, I return to the strategic assessment of what we face. I'm not convinced I think bureaucracies talk amongst themselves. There's a sense that when outsiders say this, they're being overly critical. The sense that we are talking up the problem of organized crime, but
God forbid we should be overcritical about our own security.
Indeed, and so the issue is, I think, a much more strategic response. Take on the top cartel criminal leaders here. I mean, you talk about foreigners in the Western Cape. There are enough local key criminals who control the criminal economy here. Basically, in the Western Cape, in particular, foreign criminals can't move in that space without alliances with local criminals. I mean, the criminal economy there is totally sewn up. If you go in there and begin a criminal economy of your own, I mean,
what does that look like? I mean, drugs. What are you talking about? Okay.
Drugs, extortion, and the like. Where the state, I must say, the
and
recent,
this is known. I mean, it's not like this is they're not hiding the ball here.
No, not at all. The recent arrest of a very prominent alleged criminal, Stanfield, is, I think, a step in the right direction. It shows we can do it, but we need 20 prosecutions like that to make a difference.
Okay, so do you want to quickly, Ian, add anything about the Western Cape?
Briefly, Gareth, I think it's crucial to say that the Western Cape management of the South African Police Service has been completely infiltrated. I think the majority of it is somehow involved in some kind of organized crime. It's not only me that feels that way. It's what COP says. Judge Tulare said it recently. It almost feels like common knowledge. It's like a little system on its own. That's this big criminal entity that's completely intertwined with senior police members.
All right, can I throw a complete spanner in the works here? And I'd love to hear what both of our guests and you, Phumi, have to say about this. But El Salvador's done some very, very controversial and interesting things recently, which couldn't have escaped you. You pay attention to international policing and international criminal justice systems in a way that most of us don't. It's your work on a daily basis. El Salvador built this enormous prison. People are criticizing. You've got people like Amnesty International saying it's inhumane. They have far too little space per prisoner. People are sent in there and they're never heard from again. You have lots of wailing and gnashing of teeth by wives and daughters and sons outside of the prison. When my dad went missing, my brother went missing, we just never heard from him again. Zero tolerance approach to crime. Absolute top-down clearing out of the police. They've removed any vestiges of criminal links there. If you even suspected of it, they have a very efficient and fast and sometimes probably unjust system of determining who goes into prison and who doesn't. But crime has hit an all-time low. And by and large, the population is safer than they've ever been. Now, a lot of people criticize this as being draconian, but many people will say it's particularly effective. Are there things we can glean from this that may be useful to us? Or are we going to continue to play this game of graying everything instead of making it morally clear and giving clarity to what criminal justice is actually there to achieve?
First lesson from El Salvador is don't let your country get that bad.
Where your population vote for a government that goes to that extreme.
Exactly, where you get this populist outcry and the government intervenes. The levels of abuse, as you point out, Gareth, are extraordinarily high. They would just not be sustainable in the South African context. That said, of course, people can now walk on the streets where gangs are active, but gangs extorted everything in El Salvador, from buses to schools, essentially what is growing in some parts of South Africa, notably the Western Cape.
Yeah.
So I think my point would be intervene now, because once you've gone this populist arrest everybody route, the problem is that the long-term consequences of that become political too. It's the gangsters first, in my view. Later, it will be political opponents. Some of these things are a sort of slippery slope.
Well, a lot has to happen to get to that point. But on the criminal justice side of things, like, again, I'm saying, like, let's give credit where it's due here. Despite all of the criticism we expected and anticipated from the left when the regime took over in El Salvador, and they continue to make noises, it has worked. It can be demonstrably shown that the average El Salvadorian is safer now. Women and children feel better about the world they live in. Obviously, there's this huge issue inside of prisons, and that's not going to go away. I'm certainly not looking to exonerate the entire system.
And people haven't stood trial, Gareth. So, in a way,
this is not great, but this is what happens when you go too far the other way.
Yes, it's true. And to return to the Pagad book,
the people who started Pagad would be in total favor of this El Salvador system.
Except some of the Pagad would also be in prison because they're involved in the criminal economy now too. So I really think we should be careful with models like that. I think there are solutions within the framework of the rule of law which can be successful and greatly reduce crime rates.
So a couple of potential gangsters go into jail for the rest of their lives, but innocent civilians get to be free and enjoy a peaceful life.
Potential gangsters.
Everything's a trade-off, right? Yeah. I mean, a lot of people would say that's not a bad trade-off.
Potential gangsters.
We don't know.
And how do we decide on,
we don't know.
on that potential?
We don't know, Phumi, but a full prison, I think we could do with more of those. And I think we may need to build we may need to build a special one just for politicians.
We have full prisons.
Okay. Ian,
overfull in some places.
Before we move on, Ian, you want to say anything before Phumi takes over in this one?
No, I'm loving this. I'm having a very, very good laugh. No, I'm saying I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm having a good laugh. Look, I think one of the excuses, just on a serious note about the prisons, we very often hear, but prisons are too full, and just in a South African context, and I just say, well, build more.
But as someone says in the comments, Ian, the gangs are run from prison in South Africa. That's also true, right?
Absolutely.
It's
prisons are breeding grounds for gangs.
But this is where the checks and balances also come in. That it's crucial that we have those checks and balances. I'm just saying that it gets very frustrating when you always hear, but the prison is too full, so he has to come out, because whether he's in or out, he continues with the criminal act. In fact, some of them are very successful with running the entire enterprise from prison. Mm-hmm. It's what they do best. Can I say something very shortly, Gareth? The other day, we were with Carte Blanche about a child murder not far from Paul, and 4 gangsters that I always see there, all 4 of them are often in prison. They always greet me when we get to the parents of this child, and they always offer to look after my car. And on this day, it was raining, and I just decided I want to know their story. So I walked over to them, and people might say it's frowned upon, and I literally hooked my arms into 2 of theirs, and I said in Afrikaans, I said, so which one of the 4 of you bliksems have been in prison last? And all 4 of them answered exactly the same time, and they said, "Ek meneer." And I laughed, and we sat down on the sidewalk, and then I started chatting with them, and I started speaking with them, and one of the big things that came out, and I said to them, but why do you keep on, doing the wrong thing? And they said, well, when I came out the first time, and all of them said this, when I came out of prison the first time, I really wanted another chance. So I tried to get a job, etc. But as soon as someone hears I came from prison, they immediately closed shop. And then he said, but I have to feed my children. So I start with petty things, and it escalates, and eventually I continue. And then eventually all of them are in some kind of a prison gang, in Numbers, for example. One of them specifically, said he's a 28, not because he wants to be necessarily. He says, but it became a way of survival, not only in prison, but even on the outside. So, there's a big social context part that we need to understand. I don't have all the answers. I just know that.
Yeah, but let's at least stop bullshitting each other. Those things are downstream from whether or not your criminal justice system works or not. They are downstream. So you've got to make a decision. And if you're the government, that decision is yours to make. So either you're sitting on your hands like it seems ours are, or something horrible is going to happen.
Well, speaking of downstream from a criminal justice system that is or is not working, I think it's disingenuous to talk about how full the prisons are when you also have the system not working, in that most of the people sitting in prison are awaiting trial. So if the system was working, if it was moving in the way that it would, you would be able to sift out the people that you can put into a rehabilitative system. You would be, all of those things are, it's interdependentness within the system that says, how do you, when you bring in young offenders for petty crimes, how do you make sure that they don't end up embroiled in a lifelong life of crime.
Well,
right?
consequences for your actions. That's all there is to it.
But
Right? I mean, Mark?
Can I just return to the El Salvador model which you raised? There's 100,000 gang members in the Western Cape. It's just not a practical solution to round everybody up. You know, in the El Salvador example shows people are fingered who aren't in gangs. It's just
someone's wife cheats.
Yeah, exactly. And they point it out. It's a nasty way. And what you do is you create a long-term breeding ground, which you have to fund for organized crime. As Ian says, I don't think the solutions are easy, but you have to stop gang recruitment. You have to go for the top. You have to break the political criminal nexus. Those are the things we have to do within the constitutional framework we have, and we can succeed if we have independent skilled law enforcement.
Do you think we can succeed? Because if people stop believing yes is the answer to the question I just asked, we're on our road either to an El Salvador example or just complete anarchy. Those are the only two options. If am I wrong? The answer, if it's not yes, is one of those two things?
I mean, we independent reviews of South Africa on our index show South Africa's 7th in the world for organized crime. So it's just below, a couple of points below Mexico. That's pretty serious place to be. Our homicide rate is in some ways higher. So this is a challenge, and countries that do badly on the index do badly across a range of criminal markets. So South Africa's criminal space is very, very complicated. It's not a mafia state in the sense that state controls organized crime, but there are vulnerabilities from illicit mining to drugs to whatever, wildlife, where criminal activity is pervasive, and it can be stopped. We know who some of the key individuals are, and we can act if the state has the political will to do it.
Phumi, they're those words, political
There
will.
it is.
You knew that was going to come up, right? Okay.
Criminal enterprises. We have some of them sitting in parliament.
What about, guys, let's just talk about the NPA. You know, you mentioned them in a cursory way just now. Shamila Batoy, I think a couple of weeks ago, she made some surprise appearance somewhere. She's still in that position. We still have no bad people in orange uniforms from any of these many commissions of inquiry that we've had. Just what exactly do either of you have to say in defense of the NPA? And is there perhaps an idea of what we could do better there, or who we could do better? Or, because we tend to jump to personality politics, but Shamila Batoy doesn't even have a personality. So is there something you could say in defense of the NPA?
I'll let Ian start.
Ian, you go ahead, Ian.
Why do you say something like that, and then I have to say whether someone has a personality or not?
No. Just tell us whether it's working or not. That's all.
No, I don't think it is working, and it comes back to the drawing board in terms of the system. It's incredibly frustrating when it comes to prosecution of whether it's serious or minor offences, that the system is developed in a way where the defense of the criminal can literally delay the process in the name of rights. Now, again, there's a fine balance, there's a fine line that we need to have, but it makes it incredibly difficult. So even when you do have a great prosecutor that really does try to do what they need to do, if the whole nexus or the value chain of officials involved in that process doesn't function properly, and all of them don't have the same end goal, it makes it very difficult to put these criminals behind bars. And for that reason, I don't see a major improvement at the moment. Since she's been there, I don't feel like anything's changed. We hear a lot of good things being said by her and being promoted, but I haven't seen much difference. So I'm hoping with the recent arrests in the Western Cape, like with some of the gang bosses, I'm hoping that something good comes out of it, and I do have hope that we can bring change, but I'm still skeptical.
So to summarize, you're saying it's the NPA, the non-prosecuting authority.
Amen.
All right. Now your turn, Mark.
I think there's a long way to go. Gareth, Phumi, it needs much more resourcing, more skills. I think the leadership in the NPA is serious about wanting to do things, but there are budget cuts. I think we need a specialized response to organized crime, which doesn't really exist in the NPA. They rely on...
Well, it was eviscerated by the Zuma administration.
Correct, yeah, and they rely on dockets coming from the police. So the system is, in a sense, broken for the level of sophistication that we require and the level of strategic response that we require. I think we're not set up to tackle organized crime now in the institutional structures we have. And I think this is the key point about learning from elsewhere. That's why I think we need an independent anti-organized crime and corruption body, and we should lobby for that as citizens.
How would you see something like that coming together? That's an interesting idea, but how would it constitute itself in such a way that it would have a mandate from the people and from government?
Well, it would need the development work and the legal work to make it possible. It would need...
we got lots of lawyers.
Yeah,
sure. They charge like a wounded buffalo, so we just need to pay a bunch of lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, and remember the Scorpions, okay, it's almost like you're not allowed to mention the name Scorpions in the political discourse because people don't want to return to the Scorpions. But what was the Scorpions? Independent, well-led, not with massive resources. Resources are tight now, but they made a difference partly because they understood the symbolic importance of law enforcement rushing up, with cars, targeting individuals.
And they were competent.
And they were competent.
That word always comes up and the ANC hates that word competent because they don't have any of it.
So, I just did a quick little Google search here to see, because we know that Cyril Ramaphosa appointed Shamila Patoi, and people who listen to the show know how I felt about that when it happened, when it was announced. But, and we spoke about political interference.
Yeah.
When you have the head of your national prosecuting authority being appointed by a political head, it kind of, the political interference there is, well. But more than that, I think we talk about competence, and we've spent a lot of time today talking about where some of those answers are going to come to from our challenges, whether in the community, whether in the police force. But the one thing that we really haven't spoken about, not today and not for a long time, is we haven't spoken about individuals who care more about this country than about their back pockets. Individuals who care more about making sure that this country works, not just for us today, but for the children that we have, for our what looks like our future. You're talking about the fact that we're sitting at number 7 in the world in terms of where we are in a very precarious situation. What we need is not just politicians, police, communities, but we need more South Africans who care about South Africa first. Before themselves, before their back pockets, before their friends, before their jobs.
I would venture to say we have 2 such people on the show today.
Then we have a chance.
Phumi, can I return to the index? It's, yes, very technical and analytical tool. What does it say in addition about South Africa, which I should have added, is that it's in a group of countries, not many, 14, 15, that have both high levels of organized crime, but high levels of resilience to it. Why? A measure of some institutional capacity, free media, investigative journalism, etc. So the point I want to make, because people often in South Africa is all is lost. Actually, if you travel around and look at organized crime elsewhere, all is not lost here. And we have to mobilize to build the institutions to respond, precisely because we have the democratic framework, platform, freedoms to be able to do it. And we should not forget that. And if we go the El Salvador route, I promise you it will be a slippery slope to where we don't want to be. So there's only one route for us to build. And you are right, in a sense, it's a political problem, right? Well, we live in a democracy. We need to mobilize around solving that and giving a key set of solutions to organized crime. I don't see the opposition always providing the best options to organized crime either. We have to think bigger around the threat that we face.
Well, I mean, Mike Drop says, I fully support El Salvador's way. So many relieved citizens, so happy with their country now.
Yeah, I'm not.
For now.
For now.
For now.
Yeah.
Okay, but you two are warning about a potential future you can't predict either.
Well, until your son is also arrested as part of the sweep.
Absolutely. I'm saying there are obviously huge risks in that system, but which side are we erring on here? In a country where people, the number one thing they bring up almost inevitably is, and not just in the Western Cape, all over the place, crime. Now, it's not my preoccupation.
Yeah.
But for many people, sleeping at night would be a nice alternative. Now, I know that obviously in this foreseeable future where suddenly people are arrested capriciously, that knock on the door or just the door being blasted off its hinges could quite as easily come from the state as anywhere else. And our states are pretty incompetent at running everything. So the chances of them fucking up the El Salvador model, which is not a great model to start with, are very high. But there are no consequences built into society in South Africa. We see, multi-billionaires who are residing all over the world on money that they've stolen from our fiscus. We see politicians in this country who are thumbing their noses at us while their pockets are being stuffed with cash. We see bankrupt municipalities everywhere with no one being held to account. And people are just up to here with it. I'm just saying that this is an alternative that will present itself at some point to South Africa.
Sure, in the populist discourse.
We better have some good arguments against it if we think it's bad.
And one of the really good arguments against it is it captures the excluded people at the bottom of the pyramid, rounds them up and imprisons them. The elite that you are talking about, including in El Salvador, are not behind bars. So there's this false satisfaction about who you put in prison, which does reduce violence because they are the tools of criminal actors and the criminal elite. What we have to do is target the criminal elite and put them behind bars and intervene, yes, with social and economic and other interventions to prevent people being drawn into criminal groups. There are no other fancy silver bullet solutions. We have to face it, but we need to do all of that together. And honestly, the El Salvador solution is not going to work in South Africa. It would have been as much effort here to do it to change what we need on an elite crime fighting agency.
I'm just glad we had the conversation about it because it hasn't come up on the show before at all.
Yeah,
and it is happening under our very noses.
Because we have El Salvadorian journalists in our network writing and pointing out the abuses. If it happened here, you would have people on the show and you yourselves would be protesting against it. So it is not a solution. There are solutions within the framework we have that we can pursue if we push forward and lobby coherently around them.
I don't doubt that. I certainly think that the best place to start is for everyone to read your book. Breaking the Bombers is what it's called, Mark Shaw's latest book. He has written many other books which are also worth reading. Our other guest, Ian Cameron, has been reading them. So thank you both, gentlemen, for your participation today. Ian, I know I brought you under the auspices of just having some fun about Bheki Cele. Are you going to expect to hear from him again anytime soon, even if it's his appeal going his way?
No, I don't think anything will come of it anytime soon. I think it's very silly of him because he's like the best marketing manager we could have ever asked for. He just gives his critics even more reason to take him on. So I wasn't expecting anything. It came as a surprise to me, but I don't think he'll really respond. If he does, again, it's in our favor. So if I were him, I would move along swiftly, get it done, and focus on my job.
All right. Well, as Phumi said, we need South Africans who are going to get their hands dirty, get stuck in, who care, who are interested in making things work where they're not working. Certainly, I think that the work that both of you are doing in different ways is going to contribute to the rest of us getting involved and doing more to sort out this very, very messy criminal justice system we have. Thank you so much. Ian, very good to see you. And Mark, thank you for coming in this morning. Pleasure. It's great to have you here as a part of this conversation. I'm absolutely sure we'll have you back again soon. And thank you for your participation today. If you were in the comments section and you were ignored, hey, I can't do everything. We'll get to some of these points in future episodes.
We forgot to tell people to like, share, and subscribe.
They've got to work it out by now. You can't do everything for me. I mean, really. And I think we steadfastly and assiduously avoided dragging Ian and Mark into a discussion of what's going on the international playing field at the moment, and with regard to what's just broken out in Israel and in Gaza. But we will pick up that conversation, no doubt, next week. And I'm sure there'll be lots of opinions to be brought. It's probably better to have the space of a little bit of time.
A little bit of distance.
For people to be able to figure out precisely what these consequences will bring. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a happy day. Cheers. Bye-bye.